Hello, welcome back to the City Till We Die podcast, episode number 9. I think the 8 so far have been pretty depressing to listen to, probably, and we've not really enjoyed actually talking about it as much as maybe we've tried to give off that persona. But this one's going to be a little bit more interesting and different because of the news that, of course, broke over the weekend. Liam Manning's position as Norwich City's head coach is no longer. The search for the new man can start now, and Ben Knapper's going to be the man driving that. We'll dissect all of that over the course of the next hour or so. Adam, joined by Ben as usual. Ben, I guess you've done the reaction video on Saturday night. That was pretty raw and only sort of minutes after the news. Where's your head at? I guess now that news that Liam Manning is no longer in charge.
To be fair, so that video is about 7 minutes long. I think within those 7 minutes, 2 minutes of it is Liam Manning, see you later, mate, which really sums up, I think, how we and everyone else really felt about him. The attention turns to, the spotlight, I think, was and has been much harsher on Ben Knapper, and it's not going to go anywhere. He could, I think, nail this next appointment, and for the next 6 months, we're still going to have a Canary Road that really just dislikes Ben Knapper and wants him removed from his position at the football club. So it's an interesting one. I think with the manager sackings recently, everything has felt so. There hasn't been a manager sacking in the last 3 or 4 years that hasn't just felt right, if you know what I mean. When the sackings have been made, it feels like they are understandable decisions. But I don't know. I feel like Thorpe was maybe the first chance for Norwich to try and get that project going again. When Smith was sacked, everything was rotten to its core. When Wagner was sacked, it was after a playoff season and we were ready for this reset. When Thorpe was sacked, we were all a bit like, oh, okay, what are we buying into? And now Liam Manning has been sacked. And again, the last 5 years have built up to Norwich City, where they are now, bottom of the Championship. Ben Knapper's tenure, a very expensive tenure, sees us sitting bottom of the Championship. And we will talk about Liam Manning, and the question you actually asked me was about Liam Manning, but it feels like it's about so much more than that. But, I mean, you're not going to get, he's a decent guy. You're not going to get any of that crap from me. I'm sick and tired of that. I'm bored of it. I've said it. We've all said it. We've all thought it. Don't care. Irrelevant. Terrible manager for this football club. So yeah, adios, Liam. Not going to miss you.
Yeah, the statistics don't make for good reading. I think, historically, he is the worst Norwich City manager in terms of the record. 8 straight home defeats in all competitions. Just 14 goals scored in the Championship to the 23 conceded. That's the second highest XG against in the league, which, yeah, all the metrics, we could delve into a lot more of them. The fact Norwich haven't won a Championship game since August with a squad that costs £55 million. And not all of that is on Liam Manning. And as you kind of alluded to there, I think Ben Knapper, we could hear it. You could feel it, that anger towards him in the stands on Saturday. But the timing of it, I guess, is probably the biggest thing before now that an international period we're in, a couple of weeks to maybe try and find that right man before that Birmingham away game where Norwich have got to start getting results on the pitch pretty soon. I guess, yeah, you may be happy with the time, and I still feel it could have been done in the last international period after that result at Botman Road, that defeat where they're giving them this block of games, which you looked at on paper thinking they need to get points within this period. Swansea away, Sheffield Wednesday away, Bristol City at home, Hull at home, games, Leicester at home, games that Norwich probably needed to win. They didn't. But that decision's been made now. So you're sort of happy, I guess, with the time in this little bit of period of sort of break, I guess, before the next run of fixtures.
I'm never going to be happy with any of it. I'm really not. And what you said there in terms of the fixtures that we've seen since the last international break, there's almost a part of me that right now thinks, okay, I can kind of see that it was last chance saloon for him. It was, look, if you don't do anything with these set of fixtures, and I don't think if you look at those, there's any particularly easy fixtures, but there's fixtures that you'd expect Norwich City, when in the Championship, to be getting something from. And it's, I mean, the Sheffield Wednesday game for me is the worst. It's, you've got one team below you in the division, and I appreciate they've had a points deduction, but even with that, they'd still be below us. They're in, I mean, they still are in ruins. They really aren't in a good way, and the best we could do is a point. It really is just laughable. And that game in isolation, Norwich City should have lost it. And for me, I personally think that probably was what did it for Ben Knapper. And Norwich City against Leicester, it felt weird, didn't it? Carrow Road were very behind the team. And I don't think the team deserved that support, to be quite honest with you. It felt like an okay place to be. It didn't feel like it had for the previous 6 games in the league, and to lose the game in the manner they did, yeah, you can't hide from the fact that it was time. And I mean, before an international break probably is the best time to sack someone, because you give yourself 2 weeks. And I would imagine that there's a strong feeling of we need to get the next guy in before the end of it. I don't know whether that will be literally on the Friday or the Saturday before we play. I think it's Oxford, isn't it? Or whether they want to get it done by next weekend to give someone a week of getting used to the place. There will never, and Norwich City have a famous history, don't they, of sacking managers at the wrong time. It really feels like a very Norwich City thing to do. So yeah, I'll never be happy, but it's the right decision. You can't hide from it. But again, and I'm going to keep saying this as we do this pod, and until Ben Knapper is sacked, it goes well above Liam Manning, but it's just one small piece of the very complicated puzzle that lies before us.
Yeah, it's probably a bit of a stupid question, but I guess maybe where's the height and the pinnacle of Liam Manning's tenure as Norwich City manager? Just the 3 wins in all competitions to delve over, maybe a few moments within games, but nothing sort of sustained over a 90-minute period. So yeah, can you sort of, I guess, give the viewers any highlights from his time in charge?
God, I can't. I really can't. The highlight for me is the fact that he probably is the first manager, bar maybe if you want to chuck out like Alan Russell in there, in my lifetime to not have a single moment with you probably could chuck Glenn Roeder in there as well, but again he had a more sustained period to just really blow things up. But Liam Manning, it's the first time I've just not cared about a manager at all. Even when he was appointed, I was pretty numb to it. And the victories, I remember sitting down with you and talking about the victories. I'm almost sat there like, oh, did Norwich really deserve that? Like, how have Norwich won that? And there were mitigating circumstances in those games. So Norwich's last win at Blackburn, they were down to 10 men, and what was the second goal was in the 90th minute. And you just think it really is just destined for failure when things like that happen. And I literally can't think of any. He will go down as you say, statistically the worst. No connection with the fans, nothing like that. There was no. I think one thing for me is the press conferences, the interviews, and I appreciate that he did attend some of these social events, and that's a decent thing to do, especially considering how, I don't know, disconnected it is, or people can be in football now. You can almost like unplug yourself from the footballing world and not try and have that relationship with fans. But the interviews and the press conferences were so dull, and I actually think they are a really important part of modern football when you're trying to build a rapport with the supporters. I'm not saying that each and every one has to be a TED talk. I'm not saying that at all, but Norwich's more successful managers, and however you want to define success, have almost had that platform to, I mean, I kind of explain what they're doing. And I don't know, it feels like more of a conversation with the more popular people. I thought Thorpe was really good at it. And you could kind of see what his angle was. David Wagner, clearly, I mean, he took us to 6, so I'm not going to try and damage what he did for Norwich, but he was so much better with the supporters. And actually that is probably one of the ways in which he turned his really poor start to his only full season at Norwich around. Getting that relationship with supporters back, and getting them on side. And Dean Smith's another example of when you don't have it, you get canned sooner rather than later. And I just, goodbye Liam Manning. There are no moments. It's all rather embarrassing, isn't it? And it's one for him where I think he's probably going to take some time away and just wish it never happened, I guess, because I mean, how do you come back from that?
Yeah, it feels like a lot of this podcast been probably more focused maybe on what's next and those above Liam Manning, but I guess maybe his reaction as well on Saturday, heading straight down the tunnel, and kind of everything that I think supporters were maybe sold in that unveiling press conference, that he was going to be more pragmatic and he was going to sort of, I guess, tinker with things a bit more, and Norwich would be more difficult to beat in the Championship. They'd get results in games where maybe in previous seasons they've struggled, where, systems maybe come into play, and those tactics. I guess how much of that we didn't see it as sort of played, I guess, into this final result for Liam Manning, the fact that maybe just tactically within games, decision making, guess poor decisions within all that as well, and some of this sort of relationships within, the players and some of the players he's maybe chosen to bring back into the squad and not so, has sort of, I guess, resulted in ultimately him losing his job.
Well, the last few weeks has really been something to see, isn't it? It truly has been a sight to behold. So, I mean, where to even start with that? Shane Duffy, the return of him lasted, what, a game and a half? It felt like more of a message to Ben Knapper, and his comments support that in the media with his clear. I don't want to say disdain because that feels a bit strong, but it feels like that towards the quality of his squad. And there's never any sense that he really backed his players. And I know it's a tough thing to do because when your players aren't performing, there is that right to chew them out. There is that right to try and almost discipline them with words. I don't know. It really was, the writing was very clearly on the wall. And I mean, tactically, look at the Leicester game. The actual changes he made, for me, cost us the game completely. I think that's probably the first time that I've really just sat there at Carrow and gone, you've totally destroyed this. Norwich, as soon as they went a goal up, almost proved Manning right in that there was no leadership, there was no resilience. There's that clip, isn't there, of him in that behind the scenes video saying, "Don't mess yourself when we go a goal up or a goal down," and Norwich continuously did that. And clearly, when there's a trend, it's the sign of a poor coach, because managers back in the day, managing was very different to what it is now. As a head coach, your job is primarily to coach, and if you're not coaching the players, it shows, and it has shown for Norwich City this season. But yeah, the writing's been on the wall for a while. I mean, Bristol City fans at Carrow Road singing 60 minutes, then he makes a sub. He's so predictable, and it's ironic because his comments that, I think it was last year or this year, or wherever it was, he won at Carrow Road against Thorpe, was he called Norwich predictable? And I mean, it's a bizarre thing that his only ever win at Carrow Road is not as Norwich City manager. It's just a horrible record, and I mean, you break down every element of him as a manager at Norwich City. I don't know where you go from here. As you say, the comments after the game was a man who was almost gagging to be sacked. I don't know what the payout is. I don't really care. A 4-year contract, and again, we're talking about Ben Knapper. Yeah, I as a club, when looking to hire a manager, whether it be League One, League Two, Championship, I'm looking away from Liam Manning, because to use Norwich's data-led process, I don't think I'm trusting the data that backs up Liam Manning at all.
No, it just sort of just feeds into that narrative that things are muddled. You've had Atanasio going publicly within the media, 10 days ago now, pretty much publicly backing Liam Manning and saying that him and Ben Knapper almost need to work together. They're going to be sort of a force that, between the two of them are going to drive this club forward. An experienced English coach who is, the one to turn this round and get Norwich moving forwards. And then 10 days later, we're here, and yet we've still got this public backing now that Ben Knapper's going to be the one to drive the sort of vehicle moving forwards and trying to make that decision as to who's going to be the man to get Norwich out of this mess, and I guess try and guide them to championship safety, because that's got to be the goal between now and the end of the season in the position that Norwich are in. So just how much, I suppose, of that confusion and that muddle and that mess that Norwich are in, has maybe fed into Liam Manning and kind of him eventually sort of, I guess, being shoved out the door. For me, a lot of this problem isn't just him. It stems from those above him. And I have big question marks about maybe those within certain positions still. And I still have that sort of feeling, I guess, even after the news on Saturday.
Yeah, if you're a sporting director, what do? You direct the way in which you want the football club to go on the pitch. Recruitment has been so messy, and even if you've had a manager for 5 years and you start signing players who don't fit the system, or players who need time that you essentially can't afford, you can have the most experienced manager in the world and it's not going to go well. With Norwich City, you chuck both those ingredients and you chuck in a squad that needs to be nurtured in a way that Liam Manning clearly couldn't nurture. And we keep hearing, don't we, about this infamous track record of Liam Manning in the EFL, and he wouldn't have got the job at Norwich if he wasn't decent. Okay, it's almost painful to say that because of where we sit in the division, but clearly in his career things have gone well. But equally, when you look at Norwich City's bigger picture and the direction they wanted to go when Ben Knapper was appointed, and almost the excitement to bring back the project, and you ditch it after 10 months with your manager that you spent months trying to recruit for, and again, you're pushing this message of data. We deal in facts. We deal with things of an objective nature that you can't argue against. And you're like, okay, I'll do a little bit of digging about Liam Manning. Oh, okay, that's his win record. Oh, how did he get on against Norwich City in both of Thorpe's games? Did Ben Knapper see something that he really liked? They beat Norwich's F team at Carrow Road, and then got battered by Norwich at the City Ground. And again, that man up there, for those watching, George Long, hasn't got any arms, and Josh Sargent decided he didn't want to score that night. So you think, okay, right, well, what quite is it? And at that point, I don't know. You say, as you said earlier, Adam, we're going to try and take a pragmatic approach. We're going to try and be harder to beat. And I mean, would you describe Norwich as hard to beat right now? So I really, I think, I think Manning's sort of downfall at Norwich is a symptom of the bigger picture, and it's as clear as day. But it's important to not forget that Liam Manning was not the right fit, and clearly it isn't very good for what we want. I'm sure his career will pick up. I'm sure he'll be back. I'm sure he'll get another decent job and maybe do a decent job somewhere else. But as a Norwich City fan, I'm honestly glad to see the back. Oh, what do you think? Like, is there anything for you that makes any sense about any of it, really?
Not really, no. I think when you sort of well, as supporters, and we've been in the stadium, particularly at Carrow Road, watching games, and you're sort of questioning how is he still in a job? After maybe 4 games in, and there was no real positives. We've dissected it a lot on this podcast of performances, and the fact that maybe in some of those away games, Stoke, Coventry, it was turgid to watch. It was a Norwich team that, if the opposition would have buried their chances and Kovacic wasn't pulling off wonder saves left, right, and centre, Norwich would have got beaten quite comfortably. And it's not like they created loads of opportunities, and we spoke about clinical edge and the fact that Norwich, sort of missed a lot of opportunities at different points this season, and maybe haven't been as ruthless in front of goal as they have been at certain other points. But when you've got Josh Sargent, who, I've said it plenty of times, and I think most people would agree, is probably the best striker in the Championship, and he's now not scored for 10 games in the league, you've got to then question what's going wrong, and tactically they're not playing to his strengths, and they've got better players than where they are in the league. As much as I think the recruitment's been poor, and I think that lays firmly at Ben Knapper's door and the recruitment team. They're still better than the 23rd in the Championship, and 4 points adrift of teams like Oxford, and you kind of look further up the table now, and even teams like Swansea are on 17, 18 points, and how bad they've been, and their fans are starting to turn against their manager and sort of certain people within their club, and you think to yourself, Norwich are in a serious mess here if clubs like that can see it, and we're still not acting. So relieved that they finally made that decision to act, but also a little bit uncertain, I guess, on maybe who they should go for next, because we discussed this actually, I think, on the last podcast. Maybe do Norwich go down that route of short-termism and they look for somebody just to get results in the here and now, or do they kind of go more long-term and look for a project manager again? But with the backing now of Ben Knapper, and him kind of being almost allowed the opportunity to pick another head coach, can you really trust him to go and get a project manager again and then back it for the long term after what happened to Johannes? Do you also back him to go and get maybe a more experienced English coach who's supposedly pragmatic and will get results for you in the short term? Probably not, because of the Liam Manning experiment. So it all just feels really muddled, and you kind of look at it and you don't trust anyone, because even Atanasio's point of, Ben needs Liam and Liam needs Ben. Well, Liam clearly doesn't need Ben because he's been removed and Ben's still here. So yeah, it all just feels very,
Can
confusing.
I just ask something though? So, if you're a manager right now, I don't know, say you're Gary O'Neill, and you've been out of the game long enough, and you've had options. All right, you used to play for Norwich, cool. But do you see it as a prosperous job that you want to take advantage of at the beginning of the season? I think so. But do you look at Norwich now, and as you say, Ben Knapper, who's tried both things, he's tried the project manager and ditched him. He's tried the pragmatic Englishman, domestic god, and failed again. Like, do you think it's still as shiny a job as it once was?
No, I mean, Watford are almost that club that's put on a pedestal and laughed at for how much they chop and change managers, and Norwich are starting to run that pretty close at the moment. You look at sort of the record over the last 18 months, couple of years, and that change from Daniel Farker, who'd been here for 4 or 5 seasons, and had some major success here, and kind of how brutally and cold they made that decision to remove him, and then everything that's followed since the Dean Smith experiment that failed pretty drastically. David Wagner, sort of a job for mates under Stuart Webber, who, yes, got Norwich into the top six, and he deserves credit for that, and built that siege mentality that kind of was almost like, well, Ben doesn't trust me and doesn't believe I'm the right man, and maybe the fans don't firmly believe it, but us as a group of players, we can get there and into the top six. And yes, that sort of, I guess, gap between Norwich and Leeds was so visible on that night, and we've spoken about that before, and we don't need to dissect all that again, but then you move on to Johannes, who's kind of fresh and shiny, meant to be the project, the long-term manager, and we saw glimpses of what he could bring to Norwich in some of those early games, particularly those home sort of demolitions, I guess, of Hull and Watford and Plymouth and so many others within that sort of mix of games. And I still felt in that moment when he got sacked, with a group of players maybe in a summer transfer window to suit him, another year on for some of those players who were sort of new to him and his system, and some of them new to English football. So many young players, the likes of Spartau and plenty of others in that foursome. And maybe hopefully trying to sort of shift that injury problem that just seems to keep happening every single season. If they'd have got that right in the summer and maybe recruited somebody externally to come in and try and shake that up, I felt it was on the right path. And I know hindsight's a wonderful thing, but to then move down to the Liam Manning route, which I got all the he's from Norwich and it will help him sort of connect to the fans. He didn't connect with the fans whatsoever. And that wasn't just purely down to the results on the pitch. It was the brand of football that just didn't suit. It was him sort of in the media. I know it's kind of part and parcel of maybe modern coaching in England, and this kind of young rising coaches who all kind of, for me, I call it robotic. They're very much about behaviors and kind of certain things within games. And I get it. But I wouldn't be motivated by him. Just listening to him, he sends me to sleep. So if I'm a player on the training pitch on a sort of middle of the week and I'm trying to get geared up for a game on a Saturday, I'm not sure he's the man to sort of get me in that frame of mind. That's before you sort of delve into all the tactics and problems we've discussed. So I really just don't know if you trust Ben Knapper to who he goes for, because even those names currently in the frame, which we're about to discuss, one's maybe more project, one I think slightly more short term, but would they still want to be or feel they're attracted to this football club when they look at that record of chopping and changing managers? I would be a little bit, I think, reticent to join Norwich, but yeah, I guess time will tell.
Well, like, because we're going to have to talk, aren't we, about Russ and Gary O'Neill. I've got one more question for you, which is, what would it take for you to, I don't know, I don't want to say be happy with Ben Knapper, because it feels like that is almost a silly question, but do you think if Knapper came out and did a bit of media this week, and I don't know how he'd phrase it, I don't know what terminology would be required to satisfy this just boiling rage that people have within them, but if he, for example, on Wednesday afternoon, interview with the local press and essentially put his hands up and said, sorry, I got it wrong with Liam, and I'm not going to be unrealistic and say that, oh, I got it wrong with Thorpe as well, because he won't mention Thorpe, but say he did that and went, look, we tried something, it didn't work, we're going to try something else again. Does it buy him enough time, or are we so personally, I don't trust the bloke. I want him gone. He could literally put his hands up and say, look, we got it all wrong, and almost just pander to us. Do you think there's anything he could say that might turn it round, or again, to use that phrase, it is the writing on the wall?
I think the fact that he's been kind of granted that trust to make the decision, for me, is part and parcel. He has to come out and speak to make clear, I guess, of why that decision and why now to move on from Liam Manning, and kind of what that next manager is going to look like, despite the fact that I don't believe he's the right man to lead this club forward. And we spoke maybe about that lack of experience within sort of senior positions within the football club. There's a lot of people in there that are doing it for the first time, and that doesn't tend to bode well. I think you've always got to almost have that route of internal promotions. You kind of got to have that to be seen for maybe those within sort of positions further down the chain that can try and climb the ladder and reach those more senior positions. And when you maybe recruit people from other clubs, of course, Norwich couldn't go to Arsenal and take their sporting director, but they probably could go in there and take their loans manager. That's understandable. I get that. But you also then do need that, as much as they talk about experience on the pitch in the Championship, you need that for me within senior positions within a football club to ever be successful. And we spoke about it, I think, on the last podcast. Stuart Webber, yes, he didn't have a long-term sort of career, I guess, in sporting directorship, but he had done it previously at Huddersfield to a pretty good degree, to the point that they were on the verge of promotion to the Premier League. So I think that's key, and that's what he doesn't have on his CV at the moment, and that's not going to change between now and when he appoints the next manager. So I'm not sure anything he says is going to change fans' minds, particularly when you sort of walk behind the City stand there on Saturday night, and there's that massive majority now of fans that decided to stay there and protest. And I don't think it was just purely, we want Liam Manning out. I actually think it was probably less about that. It was more about maybe Ben Knapper and bad decisions, poor running of this football club now for quite a number of years. And it extends further than just Ben Knapper. I think there's sort of people before him that deserve, sort of some of the criticism that's led to this slow decline that Norwich are on. But he's the one that ultimately has sold Norwich fans almost two dreams. One with Johannes, long-term project manager, get behind him. The fans done that. They wanted to warm towards him. And even when he was removed, I think there was a large majority that still felt that he was the right man for maybe the next season to be given a go. He then goes for Liam Manning. That's clearly not worked. So I have big questions now as to, whether I would trust him. And I guess maybe if you want to extend maybe on maybe your feelings on that, Ben, because I think you probably have a sort of similar thought train to me.
No, I completely agree. So I'll try not to repeat what you said. The point I want to make is, I think Ben Knapper has made his boss and Norwich City's owner look an idiot, an absolute fool. I think we all knew when Mark Atanasio was talking on the radio, look, the bloke clearly doesn't really know what he's talking about football-wise. Whenever he mentioned Liam Manning, it's almost like, yeah, okay, mate, he's holding the bag of cash, isn't he? And you're just looking at him like, yeah, okay, yeah, say what you want. But he what's clear to see, and I don't think you even have to be a football fan to understand the concept that the owner of a football club has gone on the radio and for as much as I think a lot of the answers were fluff, he clearly has his heart in the right place and actually done something a lot braver than what a lot of owners of football clubs who supply and almost hide out of the way. I think it's quite a brave thing that he did, and braver than what a lot of those characters would be capable of. But he's made him look a fool, because what was it since that interview, two or three games where he said, look, he's got the record, he's got the backing, and as you said earlier, Liam needs Ben, Ben needs Liam. I think sacking him makes sense, but for your own job prospect, like, what the hell are you doing? Because as you said, I think you used the word messy, didn't you, in terms of Norwich's strategy, not just for recruitment, not just for hiring a manager, but everything about the club is just so messy. There's no vision. There's clearly, it's almost like a closed shop. It's this little private club that make the decisions, and they must all like sort of pat each other on the back and be like, yeah, brilliant, rather than challenge each other. And I mean, it's like any business, really. You can always tell when that's happening, and at Norwich, that's so present, and it's so poignant, and it's damaging Norwich massively. And I don't know, if I'm Ben Knapper, I don't even know at what point you just call it a day and quit. I think now Manning's gone, because I really felt like if he wasn't going to be sacked, I like genuinely thought, you've got to resign from this. You have to walk away, have a little bit of integrity. Now he's gone, Ben Knapper needs to resign. If he has half a brain, you've got to see this is not going well. You've spent so much money. You've ditched two, I think, very different projects. And you've made your new boss look an absolute idiot. At what point do you put your hands up and go, yeah, sorry, guys, I got this one wrong. And football's a fickle game. There seems to always be a lot of forgiveness in football in terms of jobs. And it's a very incestuous game, isn't it? Of once you're in, essentially. And you almost just bounce around clubs, whatever role you're in. I just leave, go and try it somewhere else. Interestingly, I want to touch on your point about Stuart Webber, because he the experience prior to his time at Huddersfield as a sporting director, he was a scout. And a big part of being a sporting director is recruitment and understanding the process, but not just understanding the process, actually having an eye for talent. As a loans manager, or loan/pathway manager, whatever you want to call his job title at Arsenal, it's very, very different. You're not actively going out to various countries and sort of, almost understanding what you look for in a player. And don't get me wrong, it was a gamble with Stuart Webber despite that previous experience, and he got it right. And we appreciate the glorious times we had, but I don't know, it seemed at the time like too big of a jump. And there are elements that Ben Knapper has done well. So the way he demands a fee for a player clearly is something that he's good at. But there are so many weaknesses to his sort of ability as a sporting director. And it's things we've spoken about. It's recruitment, it's the head coach stuff, but also, do you remember the end of last season, the Angus Gunn stuff, the conversation and how he was released? We're not Arsenal. We care about our players. We treat our players as human beings. That to me really, represented these alarm bells ringing in my head of, oh, actually, hang on, I don't think this guy is right, because I think he's signed good footballers. I think he's sold players, as I said, for good fees, but that's nowhere near enough. Absolutely nowhere near enough to what you should be aiming for as a sporting director. But I mean, he's going to lead the next appointment, Adam. I don't know. It's hard to, because I'm actually quite excited about one of these names, or potentially. But if I'm any name, I don't think I'm touching it with a barge pole, to be honest.
Few names already in the frame for the new head coach position. We've had reports today that Russell Martin and maybe Gary O'Neill, who we've already mentioned the names of on this podcast earlier on, are sort of maybe some of the front runners that are potentially being sort of linked to this open vacancy. I know there's one maybe that you are swaying more towards out of those two, Ben. I guess let's start with Russ, because clearly a Norwich City legend, over 300 appearances for the football club, a fairly long stint now in management, a spell at MK Dons and sort of built the foundations there. Then moved to Swansea, a club that was maybe struggling, and he sort of gradually built them up with a lack of resource financially at that point, because I think that was when their ownership was sort of in a bit of a muddle and maybe was in that period of change. That got him the move to Southampton, and I know that sort of that Premier League record sort of overhung that a little bit. But when you kind of look at sort of him as an individual there, he got them to Wembley, got them promoted back to the Premier League, which ultimately was the goal when he moved in there. Okay, the Rangers stint clearly is the most recent one, and that's the one that's probably going to sort of tarnish his reputation a little bit, and fans will maybe sort of look at that maybe and sort of go, not so sure. But well, what do you make of it? Because I can see it from both sides. There's that sort of emotional attachment to Russ. I think he plays a relatively good brand of football, obviously very heavily uber possession-based football, which is maybe for some people and not for others. But I think from what Norwich fans have maybe seen under Liam Manning and there being no style, there would clearly be a defined style under him. And I think he knows what Norwich fans want and what Norwich fans expect from their team. So I guess there's that. But there's also, I say, some of maybe that sort of recent overhang from his Rangers spell. Where's your head at, I guess, with him and maybe potentially becoming the new Norwich head coach?
So many points to make. Immediately, well, what's the first one I'm going to go with? The first one that I'm going to go with is, if he wasn't Russell Martin and you look at his sort of track record as a manager, I think people would be more accepting and almost excited, really. Like, if it wasn't former Norwich City player Russell Martin, I think it wouldn't quite. And again, like we've stressed in previous podcasts, social media doesn't represent the masses. So that's the first point. And I think his managerial career so far has been good. For a young coach who was almost thrown in the deep end at a club with very little resources, what he's achieved in a few years, I think, is really impressive. And actually, the experience of Rangers, the experience of Southampton in the Premier League will only do his career good. He, despite the fact that he's a high performance type person, he, for me, is what Norwich City need. And I think for the same reasons as what the other guy, Gary O'Neill, could be, I think Norwich need an ex-pro for a start, because and I don't begrudge managers who aren't, so like Thorpe, for example. But right now, to put the fire out, I think Norwich City players need almost an ex-pro experience as a player, but also, he's got a decent amount of experience as a manager to look up at, not like Liam Manning sort of tooting his own horn about a sixth place finish with Bristol City. I personally, I like the style. I like possession of football. That's just me. I can deal with the boring, sort of slightly mind-numbing process of that. And I don't expect it to be like prime football, because I don't think we'll ever see the likes of that again at Carrow Road. But I don't know, it's just exciting for me. I really don't think it warrants the reaction we've seen online, where people are almost snuffing it like, oh, like what's this, and almost acting above it. That one really seems bizarre to me. I sort of said in the post Manning video, I almost don't think it's worth the potential vitriolic reaction, but also how it could divide Norwich fans. I don't think it will. I don't think it's that deep, really, to be honest. But as a manager, what he's achieved, like that promotion with Southampton, is a remarkable achievement, because since, I mean, even towards the end of their time with Ralph Hasenhüttl, they've been an absolute joke. They really have been an absolute joke under their like fairly new ownership. And as Norwich City fans, we know, especially recently, how difficult it is to bounce between divisions, how difficult and how many challenges you face once you get relegated from the Premier League. The best, most recent example is Luton. Look at the way they absolutely fell apart. So the fact that he managed to get them up playing, I think, a good brand of football. I don't think he was quite as consistent as he would have liked, but he's not a failure because of the relegation. Like, would we say Daniel Farke's a failure? Like, everyone's almost like dreaming about Daniel Farke, knowing that actually in the Premier League, twice with Norwich, miserably failed, is now, in Leeds fans' views, failing again. I personally don't think he is. But then with Russell Martin, it's like, oh no, he destroyed in the Premier League, blah blah blah. And I mean, the Rangers, Rangers is a poison chalice. As a manager, I wouldn't go near Rangers if you offered me billions a week, to be honest with you. And I don't mean that as I say something very disrespectful. I don't mean that disrespectfully. It's just, it's far too big of a club to almost warrant that project manager. You need someone, and the guy who's at Rangers now is who I was desperate for. And I'm absolutely gutted that we'll never get Danny Röhl, because I really think that if he wasn't at Rangers, I think he would have been a genuine option. And you can see the impact he's already had there. But yeah, with Russ, for me, style and definition of players is good, but also the qualities that he has as a manager, and the connection to the club. And I feel like it's almost a U-turn, isn't it, from Ben Knapper, because Russ didn't quite make that shortlist last time, so why now? And I think if he was to go for Russ over someone like Gary O'Neill, you again undermine the sacking of Johannes Hoff-Thorpe, because you've gone from ideological, I'm going to play this way, to Liam Manning, back to that. And again, unless those comms come out midweek of, yeah, I got this wrong, we're going to try it the other way again, then I just don't buy it. But as someone who, as a player, I loved Russell Martin when he was a right back. I don't think he was the worst as a centre back, but towards the end, it was time up, and the way he left the club was a disgrace. The way he was treated was appalling. But if you want to get me excited about Norwich City again, I think I think if he was to be appointed, that first interview would hit like crack. I think that is one, how you get Carrow Road up for it. It really seems like, and you look at his previous clubs, MK and especially Swansea, and Southampton, the relationship he built with supporters. And I know things got a bit pear-shaped towards the end at Swansea because of his relationship with the owners. And I mean, if you're talking about dodgy owners, I don't know how it would go here. But yeah, I'd like Russell Martin, but I just don't know if it's worth whatever this tug of war online is, and whether that would spill over to Carrow Road. But he's got a nice beard and a good haircut, so certainly wouldn't say no.
No, I think, Danny Röhl would have been the perfect one for me. I think I said it actually on maybe one of the more recent podcasts. He sort of is that manager where you look at him and he's got that record of steering a club that was in a mess and a club that was destined for League One, and he turned that round. But also, I think with backing, he was more for the long term, a project type manager. And I think Russ, to be fair to him, has always kind of well, I guess he's got championship experience, and I know you can maybe, we've tried that a little bit with Liam Manning, and it didn't go well, and you can say Rust is a bit of a project manager. I guess to a degree, Liam Manning never really oversaw a project, and I don't really think Russ ever really truly saw out a project at any of the football clubs that he was at, but he got himself in a position where he managed to always keep climbing up the ladder. And you said about that Premier League element with him, and the fact they had to sell so many of their sort of key stars, Southampton, over that sort of period while he was there. And I think Norwich have maybe seen that, even with that Daniel Farke sort of second stint when they sold Buendia, it was almost like they signed the sort of the death warrant and that relegation back to the Championship there and then. And I feel like he had a little bit of that at Southampton. So don't really fully judge him on that. But in the here and now, I think he's probably got the minerals as an individual and as a coach to try and get this club out of a mess. And I know that's maybe not the most popular opinion amongst others, but out of those names maybe in the frame, he's probably the one that I'd be steering towards. The other, I guess, is Gary O'Neill, who is supposedly one of the front runners as well, a man who was linked with the vacancy in the summer. Obviously done a stellar job at Wolves, had a stint at Bournemouth as well, after Parker left there, and done relatively well. And, I think maybe some people were surprised when he was sort of, took out of that football club, and then Iriola's kind of gone in and maybe took them to a different level. But yeah, he's got a steady record. The only thing is not really managed it in the Championship. And I guess maybe how much do you want to place on that? What do you make of him as an individual and as a coach? Would he be the right fit for Norwich where they're at the moment?
I think he makes more sense if you're looking to just improve on Manning rather than replace, if that makes sense. I think if any will, I very much doubt they are, but if anyone thinks that Gary O'Neill's second season was decent, then I remember watching that team in the Premier League. I think it was Man City was one of their first few games. And they had this problem where they just couldn't score. Like, they looked really good and they attacked, like, and they played really. I just remember watching them 2 or 3 times before we got the sack from Wolves. And I don't know, it was almost a surprise when he was sacked. But you look at the facts of they sat like 19th or something, and they were starting to, because the Premier League will chew you up and spit you out, and they started to almost be cast adrift from the rest of the division. But he for me, if I had to make a prediction now, Adam, he'd be the one that I fully expect to be appointed. Again, experienced player, not quite the tenure at Norwich that Russell Martin had, but if you're looking to get people on board, he was quite a popular figure when he was here, and I almost felt like an ironic popularity, because I don't think he was popular for his footballing ability, more so the prowess and the integrity that he played with beyond that one night away at Stoke, which we won't talk about, which I'm sure will get mentioned if he gets appointed. But I don't think, again, the reaction to Gary O'Neill on social media has been, I think it's because Norwich City fans don't really know what they want for a start, but also at the moment you could probably offer them someone pretty decent, and we're so downtrodden, and we really dislike Ben Knapper to the point where it almost doesn't matter. As you say, he's not really had a chance to be a project manager, which I want to quickly pick up a point on Danny Roll, which is I think he could have been both. I think he could have put the fire out and then built the house, and I just don't think there are many managers out there like that at the moment, which is one thing that makes me gutted. But I mean, there's potential for O'Neill. You look at what he's done so far, as you say, at Bournemouth, he did what they needed to do at the time, and Bournemouth just made a cracking decision with Iriola, because you watch them these days, bar on the weekend, and I mean they've been phenomenal. And he was almost victim to, but I think it also got him that Wolves job of actually he could be like, well, hang on a minute, I'm not losing my job or not being given the job because of my ability. It's just the fact that they've brought in someone who is going to go and manage at some point in the very near future at a much higher level. And with Wolves, again, like, what have they done since he left? And I appreciate that Pereira kept them up, but as a club, massively on a downward trajectory. So in terms of career protection and Gary O'Neill, in that interview with Ben Knapper, there's plenty for him to pull out of the bag and say, look, this is what I'm good at. And from what I've seen from both Russell Martin and Gary O'Neill's sides, both at their best and at their worst, I really don't think they're bad options. And there's one, for a start, they've both managed in the Premier League, but two, they both have done things impressive. Is that even? I think my words aren't even happening at this point. They've done things that I find are really good. Whereas I don't know, Liam Manning never really impressed me. You can talk about that playoff finish, and I mean, look what happened. I mean, it's like Norwich with David Wagner. They got to the semi-final and they got absolutely schooled. So I think they're two very decent options. But as I said, if I had to predict, I right now, and again, what are we on the second day of? Oh, who will it be? And we've just finally had a bit of a nugget from Sky Sports. I think it's probably going to be Gary O'Neill because he was on the shortlist before, wasn't he? So it makes the most sense. And either way, I don't mind. I'm just more focused on who appoints and leads and signs players for whoever the next manager is, because that's the next thing, isn't it? It's, well, where do Norwich City need to improve on the pitch? And then the manager almost becomes relevant because you're handing, I don't want to say a crooked set of tools, but you're giving potentially a manager just someone who doesn't really know how to build a squad. You're giving them free reign and a decent little check to go and do that. And I don't know. I wouldn't mind either option, but I'm fearful of Ben Knapper. I'm fearful of Ben Knapper, to be quite honest with you.
Yeah, I don't think as well, we're sort of in that early infancy of the manager search, and having sort of lived through them before, there's always other names that end up coming out of sort of the woodwork at some point along the chain. And I know Michael Carrick's out of work at the moment. Maybe some fans are looking towards him, and we've had sort of the jovial link to Mark Fotheringham this afternoon, which I did quite enjoy. I think Mark Robbins a few weeks back, even when Liam Manning was in post, was one that was kind of being linked via maybe not the most reliable of sources. So intriguing, I guess, to see how it all plays out over the coming days and weeks.
Can
Let's
I
just
just say as well?
yeah,
Sorry, again and I appreciate that. Actually, to be fair, the online reaction is quite relevant because we're a podcast, and where do we sit online? I do not get why Norwich City fans are almost dreaming of Michael Carrick, and then rolling their eyes at Gary O'Neill and Russell Martin. Like, if we're dealing in facts here, you've got a promotion manager, you've got a manager with loads of Premier League experience, and I think Michael Carrick would be a decent option. I really don't think he's a bad option, but it's almost the double standard of who they are and who they've played for. And I don't know, Adam. Sorry to interrupt there. It's just one that rubs me up the wrong way massively.
yeah, and unfortunately, that sort of lends, I guess, to Ben Knapper's maybe points in the accounts and that statement, and maybe the club's ambitions of being an established Premier League club by 2028, which I mean, I'd question, because even if they got promoted this season, which let's be honest is fairly unlikely, you're then saying you're going to be an established Premier League club after 2 years, which I wouldn't deem 2 years in the Premier League as established, because Norwich have sort of had that in past years gone by before Ricky ran Wolfswinkel, and it was meant to be that sort of third season where they kicked on, and ultimately that ended in relegation and maybe the decline of where everything is at the moment. So not really sure I buy all that, and kind of that statement was intriguing. I guess maybe the club's still releasing it despite the sort of position that Liam Manning was in at that point, and kind of maybe being pretty close to being pushed out the door, and sort of the feeling around Ben Knapper and the football club at the moment. I feel like it could have been edited and changed, or maybe completely removed before it was released, even if it had have been written in sort of maybe the weeks before sort of the real sort of crunch downfall that this club's spiraled down in recent weeks. So I guess maybe what did you make about that? Because that's maybe the bigger picture as we sort of move on to where Norwich City go next.
I mean, it further supports for me the the thing I said earlier of Ben Knapper almost undermining what's going on, and what is to be expected. So, as you say, establishing the Premier League by 2028 is it's delusional. It truly is delusion in its finest fashion. This is again, we're back at the point where we're talking about that bigger picture, and things are so messy, and you're almost presenting a plan, and sometimes it makes sense to be ambitious, and I think what they want that to be is they want that to be the carrot on a stick. They want that to be what was it, Dele Alli with his little World Cup dream on his phone. They want it to be that, but in reality, we all know it's not going to happen, and we're not idiots. We've been round the block. We've been part of this club for all of our lives. We know when things are unrealistic, and that is just a prime example of again, when you add that along with everything else that's going on. It's a set of executives, it's a set of directors that don't know how to achieve this goal that they've set, and it's so clear, it's so obvious. And what I was doing there, as I was looking down, is just looking at the championship table, and I think looking at it, 6 of the top 7 have all got, I don't know how to describe it, like these domestic managers, like Lampard at the moment. Well, Rob Edwards was at Middlesbrough. We shan't talk about that because Jesus. Mark Robbins at Stoke, Paul Heckingbottom at Preston, Alex Neil, former Norwich man, of course, at Millwall, and then McKenna down the road. It's the direction I think they have to go, and actually, it's proof that it does work, which is why I don't know, it's almost sad that it didn't for Liam Manning, but I don't think Norwich have to go and I feel like this is massively irrelevant to what you asked me. But Norwich don't have to veer away to that foreign hire again. You know, when it was almost fun to just throw a random name of some second division German team in and be, oh, that's exciting. It doesn't need to be that complicated. You can get domestic success from within this country. But to go back to your point, yeah, I don't trust. And again, to be fair, it supports the point of you've got this club and Ben Knapper, who this is evident to see that it does work, and like his delusional goal. And I mean, in that quote, as you said, like backing Manning, there's no trust, there's no faith, there's no reason to believe that they can do it. And I mean, for example, when we get to the next international break, because these are our bookmarks, aren't they? When we get to the next international break, we could have, I don't know, for example, Gary O'Neill in charge and have won 4 games on the spin, and things could be looking a little bit rosier. For me, that lingering feeling of almost doom, impending doom, will remain very present, and problems don't go away in football. They stay until they're addressed. I don't know, Adam. It's you said at the beginning, didn't you, that it is a chance for us to talk about something not depressing, but actually I think the sacking of Liam Manning and the way we've spoken about Russell Martin and Gary O'Neill, and if you were a manager, would you want to step into Liam Manning's shoes, makes it probably more depressing, because yeah, reality will come knocking and everything will turn to mess when it.
Yeah, I think maybe to round off, let's talk a little bit maybe about the rest of the season and sort of, I guess, the expectation, the bar from here, because maybe you mentioned it there, some of the names of some of the sort of managers that are in positions at football clubs that are now competing in that top 6. And I look at Stoke and I look at Preston, at clubs that were at the wrong end of the table. Even Lampard, when he went into Coventry, that was a club that had parted ways with Mark Robbins, who'd been there for 10 plus years and was loved by the fans, and it wasn't a popular decision despite the fact they were really struggling. And you kind of look at the way he galvanized that club, and I've seen videos on social media of him celebrating in front of that fan base who absolutely adore him right now, and they look like a club that's pushing and almost destined for the Premier League. And it can change quickly. So if Norwich get the appointment right, and maybe sort of some of these other changes that fans want might materialise, and things start to look a little bit more rosy. But I guess in the here and now, where's your head at in terms of between now and the end of the season? I mentioned it at the start. I still feel that survival is the key, because relegation to League One would be catastrophic for this football club, and it would set them a massive step back. Because even if, yeah, for me, they survive the summer, you then reset again. And actually that optimism is there again, because fans will feel that maybe if a manager's come in now and got this club moving upwards in the table, and they kind of back him again, I guess, in that window, that feeling always changes really quickly in football. So, yeah, where's your head at, I guess, now, in terms of where we move forward in this season?
In the here and now, as you say, it's survival. We're 15 games in, Adam, 15 games. And we should be rock bottom. We really should. So it's got to be survival for me, given how bad things have gotten, and actually, that feeling of dread going to Carrow Road, given how bad that all is, I don't mind looking at this as a season to just look. Let's just stay up. And again, you need to address the other factors, but it's stay up. And you know what? That goal can change, because you look at like Lampard last season, and Michael Carrick as well in his first season, and where they inherit. I think they were both 17th. Both Middlesbrough and Coventry were 17th when Lampard and Carrick took over, and where they took them. So it's possible, but what word did I use earlier? Delusional. It's delusional to think that you can just easily replicate that. And Ben Knapper needs to really realise that actually I've got to prep the next manager to be able to survive, because it's so easy to get just consumed by this division. Again, who did I mention earlier? Luton, a prime example. They were the Premier League whipping boys, weren't they? And then very quickly became the Championship whipping boys. And there are a lot of case studies in recent history. I mean, Stoke have been in despair in fairly recently. I think Fulham did at one point. Huddersfield, a great example. It's not a forgiving league, mate. It will tear you apart. And right now, it's ripping Norwich City limb from limb, and they need someone in. You mentioned it earlier, didn't we? And I feel like we've mentioned it quite a lot. The squad is far better than where it sits right now in the division. So the first thing, as we said, Manning gone, get someone in who has a little bit of a clue, stay in the division. And for example, by the next international break, we if things have gone well, we could be 17th, 16th, and then we can start dreaming of mid-table, and then we can start dreaming of top half, and that's probably where reality will hit us. But it's got to be survival. And I think the most important thing is rebuilding the relationship with the fans, and Ben Knapper has said it. I don't quite think he is going to be the one to do it. I don't think he can repair his relationship, but by no means do I mean it's impossible for a new head coach to step in and build a rapport and build a connection with the supporters, and almost for the players to rebuild it. Because I think the fans like the players almost. I think the fans want to have that with the playing staff. And we saw it at Carrow Road, didn't we? Like Kenny McLean, for example. The crying of support for him really, for me, shows that there is a Norwich City crowd there that just want things to work, and they want to get behind the team. And whilst I appreciate that the quality of the squad at the moment probably isn't top six, you can still get behind it. You can still achieve things. But yeah, it's got to be, let's just stay up, but also let's like this team. And you don't have to be getting promoted to like a team. That's really important to remember that. But yeah, we need to stay up, Adam. We really do.
We do, yeah, and I think that willingness and hunger from the fans, that noise when that goal went in on Saturday, that's as loud as I've heard it for a long time. So I don't think you can really question the fan base. The fan base is fully there in support of this team and this club, and they want ultimately to see success on the football pitch. And the fact that Norwich materially can't change that playing squad till January, and maybe there's some clear areas I think that they need to address in that window. Whoever they appoint between now and then has ultimately got this core group of players until Christmas. So we've got to get behind them, hopefully, and Norwich can maybe start to look upwards because, as you say, survival has got to be the key at this point. I think we've chewed through quite a lot of the fat. I don't know if there's anything else you want to add, Ben. I feel like we've done a lot of talking, and the actions, I guess, of the coming sort of days and weeks are going to be maybe more of the talking point moving forward.
Yeah, I think we've covered it as well as we can for how raw the sacking of Liam Manning is, but also how fresh that news is of potential candidates. I think the content over the next 10 days has almost got to be a little bit of theorizing and actually maybe deciding what we want, which I don't know. I don't know what I want anymore. I just want to go to Carrow Road and feel happy. But yeah, for me, here and now, just to sum it up, I would like Russ Martin. I'm sorry, I would like Russ Martin. And I probably expect it to be Gary O'Neill. I don't know what your little go on, do a little prediction. Are you with me on O'Neill?
I think that's would be where my head's at, as you say. The fact that he was one of the front runners in the summer, and clearly, I think his stock maybe is low still at the moment, maybe in terms of other jobs. And I look around the Championship and kind of look at other clubs, and okay, there might be a vacancy at Middlesbrough coming up, and you sort of look at that and think, could he be the right man for that? But yeah, I think he would be interested in the Norwich job. Clearly, he was in the summer, and as much as the mess they're in is vastly different to where it was in the summer, I think he knows if he could come in here, and he's been part of a team that's successful and won at Wembley and at Norwich. Well, again, much like Russ, to be fair, they know the strength of this football club when the fans are all behind it and there's the right people in the right places and everything is rosy in the garden, and this club is moving upwards. So I think the fact he knows that, I don't think he would disregard the opportunity to come here. So we'll see what we get. Of course, thanks for listening over the course of the last hour or so. If you're still listening, get those names for maybe who you want to see as Norwich City's new head coach down below, or any other comments or sort of feelings, I guess, for everything we've discussed over the course of this podcast. Thank you very much for 400 subscribers. We've hit that milestone. We've only been going just over 2 months, and I think we've both been pretty pleased with the growth and the community feeling we're starting to build over here. So if you've not already hit that subscribe button, then please do hit that down below, and you can say be part of a growing community of Norwich fans who hopefully have got more positive things on the horizon. But time will tell. I'm sure we'll be seeing you very shortly, maybe over the coming sort of days and weeks for as this head coach hunt gathers a bit more pace. So keep it locked to our channels. We'll sign off. Thanks for joining us in this one, and we'll see you in the next City Till We Die podcast.